The impact of being harmed by a treatment you're told was gold standard, to go to your surgeon and be told you're a mystery patient and be belittled and gaslit and denied, and then to suffer in silence in your home alone for years, some of these women. The impact is just devastating.
Coming up on British Thought Leaders, I talk with Kath Sansom about thousands of men and women suffering from mesh implanted during surgery.
These are absolutely horrific complications that are devastating, they're life-changing, and oftentimes they're irreversible, and people are living in chronic pain.
Kath says a recent legal win by women in England is the tip of the iceberg.
That was a huge moment. They won a group product liability case against 3 mesh makers. It's the first time there's ever been a successful group action ever in England.
And talks about the institutional problems behind this scandal.
It's not even just a women's health scandal, it's a scandal of flawed scientific evidence, poor data capture, of appalling regulation. You know, it's much wider than just the mesh campaign.
Welcome to British Thought Leaders, I'm Lee Hall. Today I'm sitting down with campaigner and former journalist Kath Sansom. Kath, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me on.
So you run the campaign Sling the Mesh. Could you tell us a bit about what the campaign is about and why it's important?
Yeah, so it was a campaign that began out of personal experience. Back in 2015, I had what I was told was a simple surgery to fix embarrassing bladder leaks after childbirth. I'd had 2 big babies. More than 1 in 3 mums get this problem, and I was offered this simple surgery and thought, why not? Came out in terrible pain. I couldn't believe how much pain I was in, and Googled online and found some of the women suffering, but their voices weren't being heard. So within 2 weeks of that surgery, almost 10 years ago now, I set up Sling the Mesh. There were 20 of us, and there's now almost 11,000 from around the world, men and women actually, who've had mesh implants as part of their operations.
So how big of a problem is this? I mean, obviously there's an 11,000-year campaign, but you know, more widely.
Well, it started out a women's health campaign, and then I quickly realised actually this surgical mesh is used for a lot of other operations. So it's also used in hernias, so that's why we have male members. It's also beginning to be used quite widely as part of reconstruction operations for women who've had a mastectomy. So mesh is used in some of those surgeries. It's used for prolapse, bladder leaks, and also frighteningly as part of some shoulder repairs if you've perhaps had a muscle tear. And what it is, it's almost like a quick fix. It's a piece of plastic mesh and it's used to strengthen weak tissue. So it's a much wider problem than just a women's health issue.
Do you know how often the problem will occur and how often it's used with no problems?
Well, what's really difficult to gauge is the scale of the complications and the scale of the mesh scandal, because there's no data. So, for example, for the women's mesh, there was no hospital coding created until 10 years later. So women were being implanted from the late 90s with these mesh implants, and it wasn't until 2008 that there was actually a code. So there's no way to track these women to see if how they're getting on. There's no long-term databases. That's pretty much globally, other than the joint registry. So there's no way of knowing just how many people are suffering. So I'm asked this question all the time, like, is it 10%, 20%, 30% risk? Honestly, nobody knows, because the data is so poor, and that's in all countries. And that's something that really needs to change.
So is that an easy thing to change, do you think?
Oh, it's an absolute nightmare, if I'm honest. The first hurdle, if you like, was having our voices heard. So even as a former journalist, I had a pretty good idea of how to tell a story and how to raise awareness and how to gather momentum. But I found that I would have doors shut in my face because there wasn't the data to prove the scale of complications. Journalists and indeed politicians in the first sort of 18 months really were a little bit hesitant to support me because I didn't have the evidence,
right.
The evidence wasn't out there. So finally I did go to Portcullis House with my local MP, and there were some others who came along to listen, and at that point they realised, hang on, there is something here, let's set up an all-party parliamentary group, and that was back in 2017. And once we had that political lobby group, if you like, it enabled us to put a bit more pressure on on the government. And in 2018, there was the Baroness Cumberledge Review, which began into mesh, Primados and valproate, 3 women's health disasters. But I think without that, I have a horrible feeling I would still be out there desperately trying to get people to take me seriously.
So if someone does have complications with mesh, I mean, can they just take it out again, or is it not that simple?
It's not that simple. So it's like a plastic weave. It's made of the same material used for our drinks bottles. I mean, it's insane, really. There's no allergy testing before this implant is put in. So you have this plastic mesh weave. It's designed to be permanent, whether that's for a hernia, a prolapse repair, a mastectomy repair. It's designed to go in and then it embed itself, so like the tissue grows through the weave, if you like. So trying to get this plastic implant out if it causes a complication is sometimes impossible. Sometimes you sort of pick away at it. It's almost like getting chewing gum out of matted hair. For some people, if it's created like an infection, sometimes that is a little bit easier to remove, but it's really complex and can be very dangerous surgery. And in some cases, it's impossible and cannot be removed.
Really? So what's life like for those people in that situation?
Well, for women and men on the page, if they can't have their mesh removed, or indeed if they've gone for removal and only had a partial simply because it can't be found, because it's so deeply embedded, or it can't be removed because it's too dangerous to, they live in chronic pain. What happens if you cut the mesh, it can, like it has hardened edges that can then cut into nerves and tissues. Even without removal, the mesh edges are very, very hard, and it can almost act like an internal knife. It can become brittle, so it can start cutting into, like I say, nerves, tissues. We have men in the group where mesh has sliced their spermatic cord after a hernia repair. We have members where the mesh has sliced into their bowels or bladders, and they've now got a colostomy or a stoma bag. Women where the mesh has sliced through vaginal walls. Do you know what I mean? These are absolutely horrific complications that are devastating. They're life-changing, and oftentimes they're irreversible. And people are living in chronic pain.
So what's the kind of period of time from someone having an operation and mesh being implanted to them experiencing problems?
That's such a good question, because it could be instant, like me. My pain was instant, so it's very clear of causation. But we have members on the groups. It can take months or even years before complications cut in. So we have one member who, her mesh sliced her urethra 16 years after implantation.
So she was fine for 16
years?
Yeah,
fine for 16 years. Another guy, he had a hernia mesh. I think his was fine for about 2 or 3 years. And then it sliced his spermatic cord, where it like turned brittle inside, and it's that ticking time bomb that is really awful about the mesh story. You know, there could be someone watching this going, well, I've had a mesh surgery and I'm fine. Yeah, but you might not be fine next year, and that's the real horrible problem about mesh implants.
And there's nothing those people can do in the meantime. They just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, it is very much a wait and see. Yeah.
If someone's in the hospital and mesh may be being used, you know, are they informed? Are they given choices? Are they told the risks?
Well, that's another part of the problem. We've run a lot of surveys on the group over the last 10 years, and we found that as many as 9 in 10, myself included, were not warned of any risks. So I didn't know it was plastic. I didn't know it was permanent. I assumed, as a lot of people on the page when it's the women's mesh, we thought it was a bit like a contraceptive coil, so if we didn't get on with it, it could be easily removed. Not the case at all. You're not told that the plastic material can cause allergies, food intolerances, rashes, autoimmune diseases. The complications on the page are so extreme. There's like 2 elements. There's the pain element, but there's also this autoimmune element too. So when you have these complications, like I say, it's life-changing, but moreover, you're not warned. You don't know that this is a possibility. So you haven't been able to make a fully informed decision.
And why are we in this situation when we know about this product and it's still being used so much?
Well, the short answer is it's a quick fix. So on paper, it's the accountant's dream. If you're presented with a patient that, say, has a hernia, or, say, a woman with a prolapse, the traditional repairs of using skilled stitching with an experienced surgeon, that might take maybe 2 to 3 hours. Whereas you have a piece of plastic mesh, that could perhaps take 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes. So on paper, it seems like a really great quick fix. It's almost the equivalent of going to a very talented seamstress to take up your hem on your trousers, or using a bit of wonder web. It's that simple. It's a cheap fix. But of course, campaigners like myself and many others globally indeed are trying to get across that long term this is costing so much more money in treatments, pain medication, patients who are depressed and suicidal. Long term it's costing a lot more.
Where does responsibility lie for fixing this? Is it a government thing? Is it healthcare professionals? Is it manufacturers?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. There are so many strands to this. So regulators should be regulating better. So in this country we have the MHRA. They don't track and trace long term the harm of medical devices. There's something called the yellow card system, which I know got a lot more publicity during COVID. Now, public can, you or I can report to that, and doctors can report to it, but it's voluntary for doctors to report. Now, I've been putting pressure on to call for it to be made mandatory, because unless it's mandatory, doctors are too busy to log complications. They're not corrupt, they're just busy. So 2/3 of mesh complications were missed because of this voluntary logging system. And then once we have a mandatory logging system, we need regulators like the MHRA to actually look at it and spot trends of harm and pause treatments like mesh when they see lots of people coming forward with complications. So that's the regulator. When we look at approval, it is so outrageous. A toaster will get more safety checks than a medical device. Yeah. I mean, that's mind-blowing. So there's something called equivalence in the UK, and it's called the 510K in America. And what it means is if there's something already on the market, then you can have your new medical device approved because it's equivalent. No real proper safety checks. They're not looking at the material. You don't need to do any sort of present any evidence to anybody. That equivalence route surely needs a more robust system so that we're not just carte blanche having medical devices approved causing harm. And then, of course, the NHS, surely they must be seeing women coming forward when we're talking of the pelvic mesh scandal, but we all hit a wall of institutional denial, so there's responsibility lies there also. So it's multi-strands, but we need to do better.
What are the key changes you would like to see?
Well, the mandatory reporting of complications to the yellow card by doctors, that's really key. I want to see a Sunshine Act for the UK. They've got one in America, Denmark and France. And what that does, that puts the onus on industry to log all of the money it gives to the health sector. Now, the reason we need that is millions is given to health charities, lobby groups, doctors, researchers, teaching hospitals, surgeon societies, millions every year, not just America, UK, globally. And that's not some philanthropic money. Obviously, you know, that can be very persuasive to key opinion leaders or someone writing a piece of research. Now, campaigners like me need to be able to see the money that's going into the health sector, because it can cause prescribing bias, and it can affect research integrity. So if we're having new papers coming out in scientific literature that's promoting a certain treatment and saying this is really great, which is what happened with mesh, if I can then go to the Sunshine database and say, well, hang on a minute, all of this scientific literature has been funded by consultants who are paid by Johnson & Johnson or Boston Scientific. Do we not need a little bit more cynicism here about the ethics of this and whether their results are actually as positive as they're making it out to be? So Sunshine Payment Act. And I think listening to harmed patients, and that goes for NHS and government.
We saw in the summer a group of women win a legal case in England. Could you talk a bit about that? It must have been quite a big moment for you.
Yes, that was a huge moment. They won a group product liability case against 3 mesh makers. It's the first time there's ever been a successful group action, ever, in England. Even the metal hips failed in 2018. And I don't know whether you remember the pit breast scandal. Those cases ran through the French courts. So this mesh successful action is so groundbreaking because it's the first successful group action. It's David and Goliath. It's showing that the little person can take action against the pharmaceutical and the device giants. However, it was just 140 women, and there's thousands in my group alone who haven't been able to be part of that group action. So there's still a lot needs to be done. And indeed, financial redress is another thing that I'm calling for, so that harmed women get money without having to fight through the courts.
We saw big settlements in America, Australia, Scotland.
Yes.
And do you think that what we saw here is just a tip of the iceberg?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And for a lot of women, the only way you're going to get any sort of compensation as it stands at the moment is taking your own private medical negligence case against either your surgeon or the NHS trust. Now, there's women in my group who they're so shattered with their physical and their mental health. They just don't have the strength to fight a legal battle for compensation. Others, they're out of time. Medical negligence is a 3-year time limit. Women in Northern Ireland, there isn't a no-win, no-fee system, so they can't afford to take those medical negligence cases out. So a lot of women are not getting the compensation they deserve. They've lost jobs, marriages, their health. Some need stair lifts, wheelchairs, mobility scooters. The list goes on. They've lost so much, and it feels very unfair that they're having to fight this litigious system.
You mentioned David and Goliath. I mean, how difficult is it, and what can be done?
Well, oh gosh, I always feel like David battling Goliath when I talk about my mesh campaigning, and I guess really it needs to get politicians on board and some of the larger law firms on board, like the law firm that was successful this recent mesh group action. It needs people to actually care and make the difference that's needed. I know in Europe there is a move towards raising the 10-year product liability limit to at least 20 years. So my call to action at the moment is let's at least tie in with Europe, so that if you're harmed by a medical device, at least you've got 20 years.
So if someone
years.
has a mesh problem, if that mesh is more than 10 years old, they can't do anything about it.
Yeah, and that's 10 years from date of manufacture. So if you've had your surgery, for example, 9 years ago, you might think, oh gosh, I can take out a product liability case. But if that's sat on a hospital shelf for 18 months, you're out of time. It's really unfair, isn't it? And the same with if you want to take out a medical negligence case, it's 3 years from date of knowledge. But a lot of people join my campaign and get the knowledge and awareness that they can go back to their GP and ask for referral to a mesh centre and get the treatment they need. And they focus on trying to fix themselves first. And often by the time that they've perhaps had that treatment, they're then out of that 3-year time rule. It feels so unfair.
If someone's going through such a difficult personal medical situation, for them to also be fighting a massive legal battle against a big company seems really difficult.
Yeah, very difficult. And for many of them, it's too much. 1 in 4 on my page are have suicidal thoughts. You imagine you've had a really healthy life, you've trusted your doctor, you've had a simple surgery, you're like, brilliant, I'm going to get my life back on track. And instead, your life is shattered, and that's a really big leap of faith to be able to get over that. And we have a lot of women on the page, they just can't, because their lives are so ruined that they're just plunged into depression and anxiety.
The one term I noticed a bit researching this is gold standard. People were told this product is gold standard. Obviously, for all these people with complications, it is not. No. How do you think this has damaged people's trust in medicine?
Shattered it. Absolutely shattered it. And that phrase gold standard is something that's a hallmark of the mesh scandal. It was so aggressively marketed in the late 80s and early noughties, and that gold standard, I mean, I remember it in my consultation, my surgeon telling me how lucky I was that I was the right candidate for this gold standard surgery. And it, us as campaigners and myself as an advocate who's been in this arena, if you like, for nearly 10 years, I find it quite sickening to hear that word gold standard when I'm like, come and oversee my page as an admin just for a week and hang on. oh, sorry.
All right.
Gosh. And have a look at women in, you know, they're posting all hours of day and night and their lives are honestly ruined and they don't want to be here anymore. And these are women with great jobs, like thriving careers, amazing hobbies, and they've lost everything. And the only thing keeping them going is that they can come to the page and they can meet with other like-minded people who understand them, because a lot of people, even their friends and family, perhaps don't understand them. And the impact of being harmed by a treatment you're told was gold standard, to go to your surgeon and be told you're a mystery patient and be belittled and gaslit and denied, and then to suffer in silence in your home alone for years, some of these women, the impact is just devastating, yeah.
So I know you've won an award recently for your campaign. I think we're getting some insight into how important it is. I mean, can you talk to us a bit more about what you do?
Oh, gosh. Just to sum up what I do, so I guess on a day-to-day basis I oversee a page of nearly 11,000 people. There's only a small admin team because it has a huge impact on your well-being, actually, seeing so many people who are harmed. You have to, you know, I have to really work hard on looking after my own well-being to oversee the group. So we sort of approve new members, approve posts, sort of check if someone's posted, you know, do you think we're okay? Does anyone perhaps need a private message? If someone needs information, do we need to signpost them to places? It's acting as mesh spokesman for the first Do No Harm parliamentary group, writing press releases, keeping on top of the social media, like horizon scanning the political landscape to see where I can maybe gather political support or media support to get stories out there. And all of this while being obviously mesh injured myself and working full time. So it's really hard, and that's only really a minutiae of what it means to run a campaign. It is constant, you know. I might go on holiday and I'll still be checking in on my emails, sitting around the pool, writing a press release to send to media. You know, that's been 10 years of that. Honestly, I don't stop. And I think a lot of the other campaigners in other mesh groups will say the same about their advocacy. You become so passionate about supporting the people within your group. It becomes so important to you to be their voice. So I never stop.
It sounds very difficult, but very rewarding at the same time.
Yeah, 100%. It has been cathartic running the group, for sure. It has also been difficult. But equally, you know, we have made a difference. There's been the first Do No Harm report, which came out by Baroness Cumberledge. So there were 9 key recommendations in that for redress, better data, sweeping change of the MHRA. But of course, these things are so glacial, and they don't just happen. It needs me to keep pushing. It needs politicians to keep pushing on my behalf. It needs to keep the media momentum going so people are actually interested, to want to support. There has been a lot of awareness raising done, but in all honesty, tip of the iceberg. It really is.
You mentioned the political support. What difference did that make in taking things forward?
That was huge. That gave it the gravitas to realise that we were like a serious campaign group. These were proper serious issues that women were suffering. We'd very much been made to feel, or women before I came along, if you like, had been very much made to feel that they were a little bit hysterical and they perhaps weren't dealing very well. Retrain your brain to manage the pain was the sort of mantra that was going on, and having the political support gave us the gravitas to realise that this is a patient safety scandal. It's not even just a women's health scandal, it's a scandal of flawed scientific evidence, poor data capture, of appalling regulation. You know, it's much wider than just the mesh campaign.
If we look at the medical manufacturers, I mean, they have a lot of funds for lobbying, marketing. And do you think that's playing a positive role?
Oh, gosh. Well, this is why I want a Sunshine Payment Act. So there's certain research that has come out. I'll tell you about one piece of research. It was carried out by a Scottish consultant into a particular type of bladder mesh sling. He failed to disclose £100,000 of funding from Coloplast, makers of the mesh he was trialling. Now, his study came out saying absolutely no thigh pain, this is a really good treatment option. So that particular mesh sling was introduced in 2012, mass implanted into thousands of women across the UK and indeed globally, and that piece of scientific literature would have gone to NICE and formed part of NHS treatment guidelines. Well, a whistleblower blew the whistle 7 years later and sort of let it be known that there was this £100,000 of secret funding, if you like. Well, you tell me that that hasn't affected the outcome, you know, overstating the benefits and downplaying the risks. And that has been such a hallmark of a lot of the scientific literature for mesh and indeed lots of other healthcare treatments. You know, it's the overstating benefits and downplaying risks, and that's been well proven that industry money leads to that sort of situation. And I would love to see industry money stop, but it's like holding back a tsunami with a sieve, you know. It's such an integral part of our health sector now. Industry funds conferences and surgeon societies and research, and it's too big an ask right now to stop that, but it's not too big an ask to have transparency on that with the Sunshine Act, and then we can start assessing the impact, because it really worries me that we have a whole library of scientific evidence out there that is flimsy because of this industry funding.
So what are your plans going forward from here?
Well, I'm still in the First Do No Harm All Party Parliamentary Group, so I'll keep putting pressure on for the Sunshine Act, mandatory reporting of adverse events to the yellow card. On a wider global scale, I can see from marketing reports that industry is really starting to push mesh now into North America and Southeast Asia. That's a whole other nut to crack. But obviously out there, women aren't going to be able to read any of the English media coverage. And there was the narrative out there that this is a gold standard fix for women, there's no complications, and it is being aggressively marketed in Southeast Asia. So somehow I need to find a way to start raising awareness out in these areas where people predominantly don't speak English. And it's being aggressively marketed just like it was back in the 90s in the UK.
How is that justified when all these things are happening and that's happening?
It feels so unfair. Yeah, it's not justified, you know. But we're in a situation, I would say, where profits come before patient safety, and we're in a culture that there's not enough cynicism, I'd want to say, from maybe journalists even health journalists. There's not enough cynicism of the scientific evidence. Again, we all trust our doctor. We all trust the science. But actually, when you scratch the surface, there's things going on that we need to question the science, and even question for our own healthcare. Do your research, find out, have a look at the data, you know, try and find out if actually, is this a gold standard treatment I'm being offered? Is it not?
Kath Sansom, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.